So in today's episode, I'm going to be updating my review for the Fujifilm XT4 after 2 years of use. I've used this camera for professional work, I've traveled around the world with it, went to the desert, been in the rain, used it for street photography. I've pretty much used it every single day since I brought it, so I have a lot of experience using the XT4. Also, at the end of the episode, I'll cover whether the XT4 is still worth buying in 2022. Okay, so let's kick things off talking about reliability and durability. Now, in the last 2 years, I've used this camera in Abu Dhabi, in the desert, under intense sunlight. I've used it here in London under intense rainfall. I've traveled to multiple countries with it. I don't take extra care of my cameras, they are just in normal bags, no protective sleeves or covers around them. And in the last 2 years, I've had absolutely no problems with the XT4. Now for me, durability and reliability are huge. If you're using a camera for your professional work or you're traveling with it, the last thing you want to happen is that camera break down when you're on the go or when you're in the middle of a job. And in this department, this camera has passed the test. I may be just one of the lucky ones. Some of my friends that do have XT4s have had trouble with water getting in, and they have had trouble with dust and dirt getting in as well. But on the whole, all of my friends who have an XT4 are mostly happy with the XT4 and the reliability and the durability of it. Fujifilm do have a pretty good reputation when it comes to the reliability of the camera bodies and lenses, and for me, the XT4 is no different. Another thing to mention is, after all of the use in these last 2 years, the camera isn't really showing any signs of wear and tear. There's no major scratches on it, the paint isn't chipping away, the rubber around the grips, they're not coming off, and that really helps when it comes to reselling the camera in the future. So when it comes to the ergonomics of the XT4, it's really easy to hold, especially when you compare it to the XT3. The grip on the front is a bit deeper, and that definitely makes a big difference, especially when you're shooting with Fujifilm's larger lenses. And when it comes to the dials and the buttons, I think they're really well placed, both for photography and for video. Now, one of the things I love about the XT4 is how you can switch from photography into video mode with just the flick of a switch, especially when you use this with Fujifilm's movie optimized control mode. So when you switch into video mode, the camera remembers your video settings and ignores the dials at the top and the settings you have on your lens. And what it means is you can seamlessly switch between video and photography without having to change all the settings on your dials and the aperture on your lens each time. And that makes a huge difference when you're just using one camera body to travel around, because you can easily capture video and photography and you don't really have to worry about messing up the settings each time. Now, if there's one thing I'd like Fujifilm to improve, it will be to have some sort of locking mechanism on the dial at the front and the back. The reason for this is, with movie optimized controls, you use the dial at the front and at the back to change the settings. The problem is these dials are pretty easy to touch and you can move settings without even realizing it. And in my case, I've had a few experiences where I filmed stuff and only afterwards realized that the settings have changed because I've hit the dial by mistake. So hopefully Fujifilm introduced some kind of locking feature, whether that's software or physical. It doesn't really make a difference, but it will just make the whole process a bit easier. As for the screen at the back, I'm split on it. When it comes to video, it's really useful. If you're filming YouTube like this or you're vlogging, you can flip the screen all the way around so it faces you, and it makes it much easier to frame yourself and see exactly what the scene looks like. But when it comes to photography, I prefer a screen which flips out from the bottom, like on the X100V or on the XT3, because it just makes it much easier to shoot from the hip. So let's move on to the XT4's autofocusing. So when this camera came out, there was actually quite a lot of complaints about the XT4's autofocusing and how unreliable it was. But in my experience, I didn't really encounter that, especially after the more recent updates. In my opinion, the autofocusing on the XT4 is extremely reliable. It's extremely quick as well, even if you're using Fujifilm's older lenses like the 35 1.4. Compared to Fujifilm's older cameras like the X-T3, X Pro 2 and so on, or even the X100V, the XT4's autofocusing is both faster and more accurate. When I'm doing street photography, I often switch into continuous autofocus, and the camera does a great job locking on the subjects and following them. Also, when switching between a subject close to the camera and then further away from the camera, it's really quick at making that adjustment. So when it comes to autofocusing for photography, I have absolutely no complaints. Now when it comes to video, I do have a few problems with it, mainly how it pops in and out or hunts for focus. So for example, when I'm filming YouTube episodes like this, if I don't turn the face recognition on, the camera will just hunt for different elements in the scene, even though it's a static scene and it's just me moving. And it doesn't really do a good job of locking onto the main subject in the frame. Instead, it will just continuously hunt for different places in the scene and start focusing on those. And the big issue with this is, when you look at the back of your screen, because it's so small, you usually don't actually realize that a camera is hunting for focus. It's only when you view that footage on your phone or when you view it on your monitor and you realize the footage is messed up because the camera continuously was hunting for focus and locking on the fins in the distance and then coming back quickly and going back and forth. Now there are a couple ways around this. You can just use single autofocus and that way it will lock onto a single fin. But I've seen other cameras from Canon and Sony that do a much better job when it comes to their continuous autofocusing while doing video at tracking the correct subjects and not continuously popping in and out of different subjects in frame. Now Fujifilm do have a couple settings in the menu where you can reduce the sensitivity of this. I played around with a bit without any great deal of success. So I think it is something they are going to improve in future cameras. I've heard much better things about the new X-H2S on this front. But yeah, when it comes to filming on the X-T4, it's just something you have to be careful about. And it's the reason why when I do video now, I'm either doing single autofocus or I move into manual mode. Next up, in-body stabilization. And this was another thing people were complaining about when the X-T4 was released. The IBIS was really unreliable in the early days, it was very jerky. Whereas these days, a couple of updates down the line, it is a lot better. I use it all the time when I'm filming static scenes, but as you'll probably see from my cinematic movies and stuff like that, I don't do too many scenes where I'm walking or panning, and that's simply because if I start to walk with the camera, sometimes the stabilization works well, but at other times it gets really jerky. Sometimes the sides of the frame get wobbly and it's impossible to fix in post. So on the whole, the IBIS is good, especially if you're filming static scenes. It is a bit problematic when it comes to walking and stuff, but to be honest, no camera is going to be perfect when it comes to walking. You are still going to need a gimbal or some sort of stabilization to make that footage smoother. So battery life is absolutely fantastic on the X-T4, especially when you're comparing it to the X100V, the X-T3 or any of Fujifilm's older cameras which use their older style of battery. With the X-T4, I can easily get away with filming 4K video and doing street photography all day without having to change their batteries at all. Whereas if I'm going out with the X Pro 2, I always have to carry 2 free batteries with me, and that's just for photography. So yeah, when it comes to battery life, absolutely no complaints with the X-T4. Seeing how I use this camera for both street photography and video at the same time, I'm going to get into a bit of detail on my experience using this camera for those two specific reasons. Now when it comes to street photography, in a single word, it's great. It's easy to hold, it's not that big, so it's kind of discreet, especially if you have a small lens on it. The autofocusing is fast and accurate, which is really important when it comes to street photography. So moving on to video, it highlights my favorite feature of the X-T4. And it's how you can switch seamlessly between video and photography. And it means when you go traveling, you don't have to carry 2 camera bodies with you, or if you're doing professional work, again, you can do everything on a single camera body. As I said earlier, when you move from still mode to video mode and you have movie optimized controls turned on in the menu, the camera will remember your video settings and ignore the dials at the top and the aperture settings on your lens. So what this means is, if you're walking around and doing travel photography and then you see something you want to film, you have all your dials set to whatever you want for photography, and then when you want to film something, you flip the switch and suddenly your camera remembers your video settings and you can just hit the shutter button and start recording. And then as soon as you're finished recording, you can hit the switch again, go back into stills mode and start shooting photography again without having to change your settings. So within a few seconds, you can go from video to photography back to video without having to mess around with the settings each time. And this makes a huge difference, especially for travel. You don't want to be walking around with 2 free camera bodies around your neck. If you can do everything with just 1 camera body, it's going to make the whole experience a lot more enjoyable. As for the video quality, I've been really impressed. I mean, all the cinematic episodes I've shared here on this channel were filmed on the XT4. A lot of the photography you see on this channel and on my social media, on the Instagram and the Twitter, they're all taken on the XT4. So on the whole, when it comes to image quality, absolutely no complaints. For video, I've had really good results when filming with f-log or even on the Eterna profile. So to wrap up this episode, I'm going to quickly summarize my thoughts on the Fujifilm XT4. So after 2 years of use, in my opinion, it's a really solid all-rounder. Whether you're into photography or video, the XT4 is going to have you covered. So while I do love the XT4, would I recommend it in 2022? That's a lot harder to say. The camera is almost 3 years old at this point, and it almost costs the same amount as it did when it was released, which is $1,600. Fujifilm have also released the X-H2S recently that has a newer sensor, new processor, and that's more of a video focus camera. There are rumors that the X-T5 will be released in 2023, but there is nothing concrete on that. So to wrap this up, if you really need a camera today, then the X-T4 is going to have you covered for both video and photography. In my opinion, it's a little expensive for a 3-year-old camera, so I would probably advise you to hold off for a bit. If you can hold off, on September the 9th, Fujifilm do have a summit where they're going to announce some of their newer cameras. Maybe they'll talk about the X-T5 there. But yeah, on the whole, I've been really happy with the X-T4 over these last 2 years. It hasn't let me down, reliable, durable, and great quality as well. So yeah, I do highly recommend the X-T4. Do I recommend buying it today? It's a maybe. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this camera in the comments below. If you own it, or if you are thinking of buying it and you have any questions, again, drop those down in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this episode, please hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe as well. A huge thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.